Welcome, everybody. Today we've got really three things we'll be talking about. One is the equipment that you'll need if you're going to do art fairs. Two is timelines, which are basically a schedule of when you should or want to have things done so that you make sure you stay on top of things. And then the third one is checklists, which I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but there's been stories about how aircraft pilots use checklists, and that's one of the reasons why they don't have problems. And doctors resisted it for quite some time and didn't feel that checklists made sense. But the ones that have tried it have proven that it saves lives, it makes things a lot easier, and now it's standard in the industry that doctors use checklists. So they are valuable tools. And each person that uses them in different ways. If you have some questions at any point, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll try to answer them as we can. My wife, Vicki, who runs Mint Artist Guild, is here and she'll be monitoring that chat. This series is produced by Integrity Shows. We are an art fair and event company in the Detroit area. We also have some partners. Oops, there we go. Mint Artist Guild, which my wife runs, works with area teen artists to provide opportunities for them to learn how to make a living in a creative career. We found a lot of young people who were curious about art fairs, galleries, things like that. We felt that by forming an organization and working with people as a group, it was much more effective. Art Fair Insiders, Art Fest Fort Myers, and Scarab Club are also partners on the project. Last week, we talked about how to apply to shows, how to get started. This week is basically the you're accepted and now what week. So know what you need. So this is something that a lot of people who are not in the art fair world may not be aware of. When you rent a booth space, you're renting a piece of ground. The other things that you need are all things that you need to provide for the most part. There are exceptions. For example, one of my favorite shows, the New Orleans Jazz Festival, has tents and displays that are there, so the artists only have to bring their artwork. So basically, most shows require plain white tents. And it's probably a good thing because mostly art looks better in white. It doesn't distort the colors. And I would suggest not buying a different color tent or a printed tent because there's certain shows that won't accept them at all. And the show's goal is for you to blend in. Now that's kind of a contrary to your goal, which is for you to stand out and for people to see you, want to come into your booth and to buy things. So there's ways you can still do that, but the overall goal is to make the show a unified effort. Now it's possible to get a pop-up tent from Sam's Club or somebody like that, and I'll even show you a few of the ones. The thing is, it's not likely to last you all that long. And even more importantly, it may not protect your artwork very well. On the other direction, you could spend $2,500 on a tent easily. And I don't think that's where you should start either. There's two basic kinds of tents. We have pop-up canopies, which a lot of people are familiar with. Easy Up's the main brand. They're very simple. And then pole tents are the ones that are more sturdy and that most of the artists work with. Integrity, what we've done is we purchased a bunch of tents of the different styles so that we can rent them to people who come to our fairs if they'd like, and that gives them a chance to try it before they spend a lot of money. So everywhere you see a bonus statement, like it says right here in the corner, you can click on that when I send you this material, and it'll take you to some more information about the page So for example, on this one, it tells you a little bit more about different types of canopies. So the advantage is, really big advantage of a canopy is it goes up in just a few minutes and you can't lose the parts. When your tent breaks, not if, when it breaks, you'll be able to find a new one just about any hardware store or department store. They're pretty inexpensive and they're pretty low weight. Now, what's wrong with them? The frames bend pretty easily. They're not designed for rain or wind, and they often leak, and they don't look as professional. And what I mean by buckling is, as the water falls on your tent, if it doesn't shed off to the sides, it just kind of starts to puddle in the middle. And I've seen this happen with these Easy Up tents many times, where eventually there's 10 or 12 gallons of water, which is 80 to 100 pounds, and the whole top just falls in. This is kind of a summary of the different types of tents that are out there in the canopies. The undercover, I've bought a couple of those because I feel that they're a little bit more sturdy, and I like the way their sidewalls work. They don't have to come off, so it's easy to shut it up. And then you can spend $2,000 on a hex frame tent, but if you're going to spend that kind of money, I would suggest getting a pole tent. And again, if you have questions at any point, go ahead and stick them in the chat. So these are the 4 primary kinds of art fair tents, and the starting piece for how much they run. Which is best? I don't know. A lot of people have started with one, switched to another. Others swear by one tent. 3 of them have the same kind of barrel top, which works really well to shed the water. The 4th one has a top that sheds on all 4 sides, which I think is not quite as good, because that means if somebody's standing in front of your booth, they're right in the raindrops. So I don't like that particular feature, but other people do. They feel that that's a better structure for them to be working in. Once you have a tent like that, there's a lot of changes you can make. You can make them taller, you can make them shorter, you can put in awnings on the front or the back if the show allows it. They have expansion kits to make them 15 footers or 20 footers. So there's a lot of extra things that you could do, and that tends to raise the prices, of course. It's not too difficult to get a used tent either. And in the bonus section, it talks a little bit about some of the places you could go. So I was having fun with here, but wait, there's more. My wife, who's used to be an editor, came over to me and said, "Mark, that's not spelled right." And I said, "Well, nope, that's spelled the way I wanted it. You need more weight." And the fortune cookie says, "There is wind and rain in your future," which, those of you new to the art fairs, this is what I'm told is the #1 thing people don't realize, is that they need to be ready for the weather. And there's 2 ways that you can secure your tent for the weather. First of all, stakes, which really is the way that you should anytime you can. The screw-in type of stake there is much more efficient, are much better at holding than the straight stakes that most people use. Now, every show tells you you cannot put a stake into the cement or the asphalt. Every city tells us that if somebody does this, we're going to be charged to replace the asphalt. Now, despite that, some people use nails to go into asphalt, and somehow that doesn't seem to damage it. I wouldn't suggest it, but it is an alternative that some people seem to use. As far as weights, 40 pounds is the absolute minimum that I would suggest. And there's a few things about that. Water is 8 pounds a gallon. I've seen a lot of people hang a gallon of water off of each corner and think that that's enough. That's not going to do much. The cement block is 32 pounds. That's getting closer. Cement is 20 pounds a gallon. So if you got a 5-gallon bucket and fill it with cement, that's 100 pounds. Now you're talking, that's great. Now, why no water jugs or buckets, even if you get that kind of weight? Well, because what happens sometimes if it's a big gust is your weight will be lifted off the ground and hit back down onto the ground. If it's a water jug or a bucket, it could not only spill, but it could also crack. So then you have no weight anymore on that leg and you've lost anything to protect your work. This is from a company that I haven't been able to find any lately about the same things that I've been talking to you about, Artwork Archives. I think they've disappeared, but they had some good advice. So again, I'll send this to you. You don't have to read it all right now. I'll send it to you after this. Okay, so the next part is once you have your tent, how do you do displays? And there are a lot of different types of systems available, from homemade to professional. And it's such a difference than the first art fairs. I remember going to Ann Arbor and there were clotheslines tied between trees and between parking meters and such. And that was the display. People would just hang on those. The first professional panels were the pro panels. These look very nice. They're actually a frame with a styrofoam piece in the middle and carpeting over it. So you just pin into the carpeting. They're very light. Each panel is under 10 pounds and they can tie up to your tent to keep it structurally a little more sound. Setup like I show right there is about $1,200 and available in lots of colors. Mesh walls is what I tend to use. They're a little bit different. You can see the material right there. And those you have basically a curtain that goes on each side of the tent. And it's that kind of mesh, so you can hang inside, outside, and they'll attach to whatever kind of tent you have. Or to have an even better result, you can get a frame for them, which makes it a little more expensive, but it holds it better. And they're in white and in black generally. A lot of people, when they're starting out, use grid walls, and I don't think that's a bad idea. This is a picture of like a 2x8 grid wall, which is a standard piece. You've probably seen them at stores. They have the 3-inch squares that are open, and that gives you a lot of places to hang on to. It's not as professional looking, and it's transparent, which means that people see what's behind your booth too. So it's kind of distorting. So I don't necessarily recommend those. If you do use them, you could consider also putting cloth over them, wrapping them up nicely so that people don't see the grid, they just see your artwork. Here's some examples of some jewelry displays for those of you in the jewelry business. You see over here, this person's using a table with a tablecloth. It doesn't look too bad because they're being very careful. I think that's a fitted cloth. And they're using portable displays. Some of those fold down nicely. They're using the small displays here that I think are really great. This person may also have a table, but they've put a fitted tablecloth on it in such a way that it looks like a counter. And this is a custom display here. And one thing that they do that I really recommend to people is they have these photographs that they put up to show the detail of the work. Kind of like the cereal you buy. It says the product has been enlarged on the photo on the box to show you the detail. It really does help. And if you can picture, you might have 3 people standing at this counter there. Nobody can see the work. If I'm looking in from the aisle though, I can still see the photos and maybe I'll come in instead of just walking right by. Then this third one is somebody who's really gone all out. They, like this other one, have put up special curtains and different types of displays. They've even hung a chandelier in the booth. So there's 3 different ways that I've seen jewelers do their displays, and they all look nice to me. For sculptures, there's all types of platforms that you can do. My biggest suggestion with sculpture is I wouldn't put things on the ground unless they're meant to be on the ground. It really makes it look less appealing, less valuable. And you'll see that there's different heights of display. That's much more interesting than if it was just on one flat plane. This is Austin Brantley. His work's really beautiful. I was fortunate enough to buy a piece before it got way too expensive. Now for functional art, like the ceramics, this is a perfectly great display because seeing ceramic plates and mugs and things on shelves like that makes a lot of sense. That's what you're used to seeing. If you were to put sculpture on that type of shelves, it may not work as well. And this is Michelle Sapp. She makes these beautiful dolls. And these displays here are actually, they fold down and they're very lightweight. So you can get a set of them inexpensively and not take up a lot of space in your vehicle. Okay, this is once again the weather warning. There is weather. If you're in the art fair circuit, you're going to experience weather. I would suggest that as much as possible, you have boxes like these, which secure your work and close it up nicely. I would never suggest getting one of these transparent boxes, even though they're nice, they break very easily. And a broken box is not going to protect your work at all. And the other thing that a lot of people carry, which are really helpful, is tarps or heavy duty garbage bags. Anna, I see that you want to transform. Okay, so you're looking at going from doing some local shows to some bigger shows. Yeah, so the best homework for that would be to get out there early this year and see how other jewelers that have similar work are displaying. The least expensive types of things that you can get that'll make a difference are those forms where you can hang your work. I don't know if you have those already, but if you get those, if you get a little bit better quality of table covering and fit it nicely, that helps. A lot of times I suggest that people have, even if their work is more costume jewelry, is to put some of it in a glass case. And the reason for that is it differentiates those and makes them feel more valuable than the pieces that are out there to just touch. And I think that helps. In terms of displays, Larry put a display company name up here, and they have got some things. You can also look and see online for good displays.
Display paintings and readings.
So I wouldn't suggest building a massive display for your first few shows because you're going to find out what you like by experimenting with it. And the best way to see what's out there is to go visit artists. So Dan, I like for displaying canvases, I like the mesh walls. Those can actually handle a 50-pound canvas without any problem. You just use a curtain hook in there. And if you had something higher than 50 pounds, you could actually hang it off the frame of the mesh wall so that you can put up 200 pounds if you want to. You could also, you wouldn't want to put anything pinned into the sidewalls that come with the tent because that'll make it so that it's less weather resistant. The metal frame grid walls, you can often get those cheap or at a display store. I know right around the corner from me, there's a place called Detroit Display. And I think used, you can buy those for about $12 to $15. New, they're 25 or so. And then what you can do is hit them with a coat of paint so that they look brand new. The nice thing about those is they're very configurable and you don't need to have any particular size in mind. Like what Larry has behind him, if you can see his photo there, he has the Pro panels. Those are in 3-foot sections, and they really make it work well because it gives you a unified look. And Larry's also got the Pro panel box there that you can put your prints in. It's a big investment. Again, you can find used equipment. There's not much you can do to look good for sidewalls, like buying fabric. By the time you buy the fabric and build a frame or something to hold it, you're going to have a lot of money built into it. So once you feel confident that this is the way you want to go, then I think you should invest in one of those 3 things, either the mesh walls, the Pro panels, or if you really feel like it works for you, the metal grid walls. Yeah, Daryl, I think their lighting works really well with the Pro panels. They're the ones that they sell. Battery power has gotten so much better now that it's possible to use battery lighting that'll work in your tent for the entire day and then just recharge overnight. You won't have to be charging them up all the time. The question is, how do you find the right tone of light? Because each tone, you know, if it's a too bright white light, it's not going to show off your work as well. I like using some lights that are by a company called Ryobi, R-Y-O-B-I, and they're at Home Depot. And it's about $100 a set, but I've used them even in the cold, and I've put lights in the tent, shining them up at the top, and that diffuses it so that it doesn't have direct lighting. And that tends to work really well for some things. I wouldn't do it for fine art paintings because your colors are going to be a little bit distorted, I believe. Yeah, Judy attaches the light track panels to each panel. Okay, and then Larry, you're right. The size of the vehicle makes a big difference. That's something that I learned from my mother. You can tell what year she painted which paintings by which car she had at the time, because she always measured her cars so that she could get the biggest possible paintings in there. The biggest problem that you'll have if you get the mesh walls and you want to use the frame is some of the poles are 10 feet long. It won't fit in a standard vehicle. It can go on top. The Pro panels tend to be 7 foot tall by 3 foot wide, and they're very light, so they're easy to fit in, but you have to make sure you have room for them. And then Daryl, you asked about hanging from the frame of the tent. And I believe that if you have a professional frame tent, hanging from that makes a lot of sense. The mesh panels will strap right to it. And then you can also, if you want, add a second pole to the bottom so that you can pull them tight. It's good to have that mesh pulled tight. You won't have that problem with the other things because they're firm already. The mesh will blow a little bit in the wind if it's not secured properly. Kelly, thanks for joining us. And yes, you're right. The Artist Garage Group is a great place to find used displays. And there's some other places too, like artfairinsider.com. There's always artists coming in and always artists leaving the business. So it's there's always something out there.
We create like a scheduling thing and we say, have we applied to this show? Yes or no, or when's the booth fee deadline? And we have like this whole spreadsheet that has a bunch of information that will help us to remember and keep track of all the shows. And then also having a spreadsheet on like how many pieces we did sell at that show. And then I can look back to the years past and see whether or not I did do good at that show or I didn't, or whether it's worth it or not. And that's been a huge help.
Preparing for a show, I usually start a couple of weeks out just to confirm the date and the time and the location. I usually do a Google Maps search to have a good idea what my path is to get there. And so I feel confident about what I need to do when I get to the show. I think through what art I'm going to bring. And I will pull all the art out in advance to make sure that it is signed, to make sure that there isn't any damage to that piece of art. And then I will have that art packed and ready to go in a specific location of my house so that I don't forget anything. Secondly, I do personalized price tags for all of my art. So I will keep a list of the art that I'm bringing, and then I will create my price tags. Then the night before is really when I do all of my prep. I try to do zero prep or even packing the morning of, because the day of load-in is very stressful. And so you want to have a good night's sleep and know that you're ready to go, and that you're not worrying the night before and having things go through your brain on what you need and what you don't want to forget. I load everything into the center of my garage that I'm going to take before I put anything in the car. And then I will review everything I'm taking off my check sheet. When I load up, I try to think about the process of unloading. So I make sure that the last thing that goes in is the first thing that needs to come out. The first thing that gets loaded is the art. So, because it's the last thing that I need to touch. First thing that has to go up is the tent. So what you don't want to do is have all your tent poles and your canvases, but then all of your pins are in the bottom or the back of the truck, right? Because you need to have everything that's needed for the tent accessible first. I like the feeling of knowing that I don't forget anything.
So the timeline is basically your chart of when you want to do things. And some of the timelines go back for years. Like you might put down that the day after the show, you're going to send cards to everybody who bought from you, thanking them. And so that could go onto your timeline. I've got some samples.
We create like
Oh, wait.
we create.
There we go. So this is a sample timeline. Oops, sorry. Where'd that go? There we go. There's a sample timeline. And I've got some other sample timelines that'll be with the material I send you. I ask you to fill out the survey before I send you the material, because that way I get feedback and hopefully can improve the materials for the next group. So that's basically everything from a year out to the week of the show. Checklists are the next thing. Now, checklist is different because it's focused on items versus timing. So let's go into, I think I have some more recording. Here's Kelly again.
Little things that you'll learn over time. I have a little toolbox that I use. And in that toolbox, I have, safety pins and duct tape and spray paint and bobby pins and Velcro. Velcro is always great to have. Markers, pens. You'll use some of those items in your toolbox during the show and you'll forget to replenish it later. So always doing a pre-check of your toolbox to make sure you have everything that you need. And feeling prepared makes you feel confident and makes the whole experience so much more enjoyable. Little things that you'll learn.
So this is a sample checklist from that artwork archive. It's a fairly small one, but one thing that they do, which I think is very valuable, is they separate it into different sections. So the toolkit that Kelly was describing might be one of those sections, and you might even have a separate list for the toolkit that just sits in the kit to make sure that it's there. This is a list from festivalnet.com, and you're not going to believe how long this list is. This is the first page. Here we have a second page, third page, fourth page, And this is the 5th page of their list. Now, should everybody have a list that large? I'm not sure that that's necessary. I think there's ways of doing it that are more efficient for you. For example, in case of emergency phone numbers on here, yeah, well, I've already got those. I don't have to put them on the list. But a lot of it's useful. And what I'd suggest each of you do is create your own list. What I do with my lists is I create them on a spreadsheet like Excel. And then it's very easy for me to update it each show. If I want to change it up a little bit, I can move sections around. I can also do my checkoffs as I'm doing things. I think the checkoff is an important part of having the list, because if you don't do that, you lost most of the value of the list. So this is a summary of what we've spoken about, kind of in reverse. First thing was you create a checklist that helps you figure out what you need. Then you create your timeline. You confirm your details a few weeks out. And then Kelly's point, load in advance and in reverse of how you take it out. And then check things in and check them out. So that's the basics of this. Why don't we open it up for questions about any of the things that we talked about today? And again, folks, if you want to unmute and talk, that's fine. And Kelly and Larry and some of the other more experienced people, please feel free to join in and help me answer some questions or bring up some things. And then next week we have another session that's basically talking about the setup through the move out and some of the things that you want to do. For example, getting your mailing list started and so forth.
Hi, this is Anna.
Hey, Phil.
I just wanted to, if you could just go back to the as a newbie trying to get into a larger show,
Mhm.
it's the photos that you showed of the jewelry artist. So would all 3 of those photos have been accepted?
I believe those were all from my accepted list, yes. And the booth shot does make a difference. And if you're just starting, you won't have a booth shot, which is problematic. It's not ideal, but you have to be careful. One of the things we talked about last week was the importance of calling a show if you have questions. I wouldn't waste my $25 application fee until I knew that the show was going to accept my application. So if I don't have a booth shot yet, I want to call them up and I want to discuss an alternative with them so that I know before I spend my money. What I often suggest is people set up a small table display of their work and then send an explanation that this is how their work will look displayed, because it's a challenge.
Hey, Mark, I'm going to answer one of the questions here.
Sure. Go for it.
Someone was asking about Subaru Forester is big enough for canopy, mesh walls, art canvases, and prints with bins, etc. And will I need a roof rack? They aren't interested in pulling a trailer. So I have, in my experience, especially if it's a local show, this is from Dan. Sometimes you load in the day before, and you could bring your art the second day, for example, and know that you get your tent and everything there the first day, and then bring your art the second day. Or if it's an overnight, you could have someone drive with you and have someone else with another vehicle. The best thing to do is to actually preload it up. If you've never done a show before, I would do a sample load just to see what you can fit, and then you can determine what you can bring and not bring.
And as long as you don't mind putting some things on the roof, I don't think there should be a problem. You were talking about fairly small canvases earlier when you were talking about the sizing.
One of the things I recommend too is ratchet straps. So ratchet straps are a godsend. Number one, they're great for holding weights, so they can be repurposed to hold your weights. But secondly, and if you're going to put things on the roof of your car, you really need to ratchet it down.
Yep.
It's better than twine.
Yep. And then Stephen, that's interesting because most shows assign you a spot. Many shows, including ours, will ask you for preferences like, do you want sunny, shady? What direction do you want to go facing? And oddly, it's hard to answer your question because every show that I get just as many requests saying they want a sunny space as they want a space where they're not looking into the sun. Just as many that say I want an east facing booth as a west facing booth. So what works best for you? With glass, for example, I could give you a better answer because I know glass artists want to have the sun behind the booth because the work looks so good with the sun shining through it. For a lot of people, it's the reverse, where they want as much sunshine as they can coming into the booth. So they would be liking to face, say, south and west so that they can catch the sunshine as late as possible. It also turns out that who you're next to is as important as anything else. And that's the key reason, one of the key reasons why the booth shot's important, because we want to make sure that whoever you're next to is going to have as professional a display as you do. If we put in somebody who's doesn't even have a tent and is just hanging stuff off of a couple of trees, that's not going to look good, and that's going to make your work less valuable in the tent next to it, even if you have your display up perfectly. So does anybody else have some suggestions for Stephen, or what do you look for when you, if you have a preference in booths?
Don't be next to the bathrooms.
Yeah.
Or downwind from the bathrooms. Sometimes it's good to be next to the bathrooms because they're high traffic areas. So I guess it's a preference.
If you sell art that appeals to men, being next to the bathrooms might be a great thing because the men tend to not spend as much time in there. So they'll be out there waiting for somebody. So you've got their full attention. But otherwise, I agree, stay away from the bathrooms. Mostly I suggest to people, if there's music, you don't want to be right next to it because then it makes it hard to talk to your customers. But if you're under 40, you want to be right next to the music because that's the way life is right now for people, the younger folks, is they just soon have a little bit more music in their lives. Larry, a good suggestion on putting together a sheet during the show of the things you need to pack for the next week and bring it in with you. That certainly helps. And yeah, high foot traffic is essential.
Here's a suggestion.
Sure.
Framed under glass, you don't want to be in direct sunlight because it causes condensation.
Okay.
So if you have 2D work that's framed with glass, you want to stay out of direct sun.
Good to know. Well, we have time for a few more questions if anybody would like. Again, if you fill out the survey, which is at www.is.gd/artcareer, I'll send you this material, and there's a lot of bonus things too that are on it. I didn't bother showing you the bonuses because it's just lists of things that are, you know, it doesn't make sense to read the list right now. I'll put up my email and my phone number too. So if anybody has questions, feel free to call later on. And, oh, hey, Stephen, paper receipts, carbon copy, square. I think most people can deal with the square now. And if you have some paper receipts for the one that can't, that's great. I don't think you need the carbon copy ones unless you need to have a copy of it. But almost everybody is going to just the electronic now. And frankly, most people don't even want a copy of the electronic receipt. It's been my experience. But yes, you do want to take credit cards. Yeah, there's a suggestion from Larry. It's amazing what you can do with your phone. One of the things that I've seen more and more artists do is instead of investing in business cards, they have their information written out on a panel. And if somebody asks for a card, they say, oh, just take a picture of this. And one of the things that's cool about that is that it's likely to have a little bit more of your work in the photo so that they'll remember who you are better than if they get a card, even if the card's pretty ornamental. Yeah, Daryl, QR codes are great. And there's a place called a site called qrstuff.com, where you can create a QR code that'll take somebody to a web page, to a forum, to just about anything, to donate it, page for them to donate money. So QR codes are really valuable. And I don't know that everybody's realizing this yet, but recently, the last few years, they changed it. So you don't need a special program on your phone to use a QR code. If you open up your camera and point it at a QR code, it'll ask you whether you want to take the action that that code tells you to do. So that's the type of stuff we'll also be talking about next week is, you know, business cards, the QR codes, getting your mailing list together, change, food, you know, all the things about what it's like at the show and how to make sure that you have a good experience while you're there. Of course, selling the work is the major part that's going to get you the good experience. And we'll talk a little bit about how to do that. Although if we were going to be getting into a how do you sell seminar, that would be a whole nother series. So can't get too deep into it. Yes, Sharon, good. Thanks for coming. If you have setup issues, yes. That's very important. I always have a few extra people on my crew. So sometimes if somebody just needs help with the tent for 10 minutes, we've got somebody there for it. I imagine that Sharon also does. And frankly, the booth next to you will probably give you a hand too if you need help carrying something heavy or putting up a tent, pulling apart your canopy.
Hey, Mark, just to comment on that note, it's always good to tip somebody that helps you if they work for the show. Make sure you have cash available to tip them.
Yeah, that said, I'd rather you don't tip my guys, but go for it. I mean, if you want to, that's fine.
So I get great service from your staff, Mark.
Yeah. One of the things I don't know if all of you knew, but that we've done to make sure that our staff is paying attention to your work is each show that they work, we give them a $50 credit towards art purchases. So that way they're spending a little bit more time looking at the art and paying attention to who has what, because they're trying to decide what they want to spend their money on. Yeah. Yep, Sharon, we often ask people what kind of vehicle they have in advance so that we can handle it. Some of our tight spots, you have to have the trailers out by a certain time because there's just not going to be room for them. Other spaces, you have more flexibility. Most shows, you can get pretty close to your booth and unload. There are shows, and there are shows that are worth doing where you have to two-wheel dolly in, and some of those will provide labor to help. Some of them are unable to. I don't do any shows that have dollying in currently, but back when I did, I always had half a dozen or more wagons right there so that people didn't have to bring their own hand carts because that takes up a whole lot of valuable packing space. Larry, you got it. Parking behind the booth. There's one show here in town that's on Labor Day only. It's a 6-hour show. It's in a park and every vehicle is right behind the booth, and you can't even apply to get into that show. She doesn't take applications. She goes around to art fairs and she chooses the ones to invite every year. Well, cool. I think that's about it. I'm going to hang out for a few more minutes if anybody wants to ask questions. Otherwise, thank you for coming by, and I hope to see some of you next week. And a secret about the Zoom things is if you click on the the three little dots next to your chat, it'll bring up some options, and one of them is save chat. So if there's something in there that you wanted to save, like an email address or something, you can just click on that save chat and it'll copy it down to your computer so you can refer to it later on. Well, thanks and good night. I hope I'll see some of you next week and many of you this summer and throughout the year at the shows.